Video games can never be art.
Video games can never be art. The Pulitzer Prize-winning film critic Roger Ebert dropped this bomb on his blog back in April of 2010, and it started a whirlwind of discourse that has done anything but slow down. Readers and denizens of the WW. Have posted almost 5,000 comments on the article. One reader compiled all the comments into one text document, and the word count exceeded that of Anna Karenina, David Copperfield, and the brothers Karamazov. And of course, that doesn't even take into account the multitudinous essays, podcasts, YouTube videos, and tweets on the subject. So after all this discussion, what's the conclusion? Are video games art? And if not, could they ever be? Well, the disparate voices of the internet have hardly come to a consensus. I read and reread Roger Ebert's arguments and the counter-arguments posted by his readers. I'll summarize Ebert's main points. First, no one has been able to name a video game that stands at the artistic level of achievement found in other media. In other words, although the comments on the article may exceed the brothers Karamazov in length, there isn't a single video game of comparable artistic value. Second, although you can beat a game, you can't beat an opera or a sculpture. Points and rules pull the experience away from artistic expression. And third, turning over to the hands of players what would otherwise be an artistic narrative takes away authorial control. The example Roger Ebert gives is that if Romeo and Juliet were a video game, players could alter the behavior of the characters and ruin the story. The counter-argument that eventually made Ebert throw in the towel was that he does not play video games and therefore can't get it. But even if he doesn't play video games, he brings up some interesting questions on at least a theoretical level.
Can video games be art?
Somewhere along the way, my own opinions got lost in the debate. On the one hand, art seems inherently different from games. I don't think most people would consider basketball a form of artistic expression, but video games based on sports come out all the time. Would making a video game of a basketball game suddenly make it art? But on the other hand, video games often tell a narrative, and doesn't that inherently have at least the potential to be art? I decided to ask around. First, I went to the mathematicians and the engineers, the people who build video games from the foundation up, a foundation of cryptic ones and zeros.
Can video games be art?
I know a lot of my friends who study the video game design really enjoy creating the characters. They really enjoy creating the land. In that sense, it is. I consider it an art. When you get to the violence in the game or the content behind the game, I don't consider that an art typically.
Josh is preparing to start graduate studies in mathematics. As someone who isn't particularly inclined towards math or engineering, this was a new perspective for me, that the individual components of a video game could be artistic and full of craft, but the overall product could still be lacking artistically. So would you say that the individual components often show more artistry than the overall sum?
I would say yes.
But this shouldn't come as a surprise. Listen to this.
If something you recently bought with the card breaks, it can be repaired, replaced, or your account can be credited. You'll even get membership rewards points with each purchase. And peace of mind when you travel. Can your card say that?
Obviously, JS Bach's cello piece has more artistic and cultural merit than an ad for a credit card. For one, Bach's piece continues to move listeners and performers centuries after he composed it. I doubt anyone will watch this American Express commercial with tear-filled eyes in the year 2312. But what is the cultural significance of video games? I asked Bobby, an engineering student, if he thought that if 2,000 years from now, people would look back on a game like Mario with the same respect we have when we see an antique Grecian urn.
Absolutely.
Okay. Why?
They may not be the biggest part of our culture, but they're part of it. And that, yes, in the future, absolutely, the people will look back on it similarly, that they will look back on what we consider to be part of history now, as culture, music, art forms, whatever, pottery, those sort of things. I feel that they'll look at our video games that same way.
As extreme as that may sound, he's probably right. Video game sales frequently outperform Hollywood's box office revenue. And the game World of Warcraft has raked in literally billions of dollars for its developing company. And one figure puts the number of man-hours spent playing World of Warcraft at almost 6 million years. Clearly, our society is spending significant amounts of time and money playing video games. Is that effort worth it? Or, back to our original question,
Can video games be art?
My initial instinct is to say no.
James, like Bobby, studies engineering. His evidence against video games is experiential, and he notes a qualitative difference between his encounters with video games and his encounters with art.
Mainly because when I view art, it's for a completely different reason than I view video games.
Do you play video games?
I used to play a lot, but since the discovering of women and going to college, I'm a drummer, so when I go to museums and stuff, I'm sometimes inspired by that. Music inspires me. Even reading afterwards, I get this kind of inspirational feeling when I feel like I meet a truly great piece of art. But I remember playing a truly great piece of video game was more of a distraction, mindless, and I never felt very good afterwards doing it.
You felt just kind of gross for wasting a bunch of time or something?
Yeah, and especially with art form, I don't know, afterwards I want to be a better person, but after video games, I just want to lay down and crawl into my sock drawer and sleep for days kind of thing.
How art makes us feel at the end of the experience has been a long-standing defense for the existence of art in the West. We're well into our third millennium of using catharsis as our justification for watching a tragedy, what would otherwise be a painful and almost unbearable activity. We watch virtually the entire cast of Hamlet die at the end of the play because the tragedy somehow cleanses us and ultimately makes us feel better. If James felt like crawling into a sock drawer and sleeping off his gaming experience, clearly he didn't experience the kind of catharsis Aristotle had in mind. Well, maybe James hasn't been inspired by a video game, but is that true for everyone? I sat down with Will Strong, an artist, illustrator, and educator, to ask him about his experience with video games.
It's funny because there's never a time I actually remember not playing video games, because I'm one of the younger kids in my family, right? And so my older brothers always had Nintendo around, and it was just always there since I can remember.
Now that we've established his credentials as an artist and long-term video game player, let's pose the question.
Can video games be art?
More specifically, has he ever had an artistic or cathartic encounter with a video game? Or has it always just felt like a waste of time?
A good example for that would be this game called, I'm not going to tell you the name because Will is about to spoil the ending. Spoiler alert if you haven't played it.
Anyway, what was the overall effect of the game?
And by the end of the story, or the end of the game, you realize you've done a terrible thing. And it is, speaking of catharsis, it's one of the most intense moments I've ever had from media ever. And it would be, I think, diminished by just watching it play out in a movie and not having actually done that thing myself.
So, for Will Strong at least, the kind of cathartic experience in video games is more intense than in other media because he's controlling the character. I assume it must be analogous to what actors feel when they play a role like Oedipus or Medea. Will also talked about how video games have inspired his own art. He says he owes a particular debt to Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of Mario, Donkey Kong, Zelda, and other games. And frankly, that is one of the greatest tests of art to me, whether that art inspires more art. The trouble with poetry, writes former poet laureate Billy Collins, is that it encourages the writing of more poetry. More guppies crowding the fish tank, more baby rabbits hopping out of their mothers into the dewy grass. He continues, Poetry fills me with joy, and I rise like a feather in the wind. Poetry fills me with sorrow, and I sink like a chain flung from a bridge. But mostly, poetry fills me with the urge to write more poetry, to sit in the dark and wait for a little flame to appear at the tip of my pencil. And along with that, the longing to steal, to break into the poems of others with a flashlight and a ski mask. One of the indicators of great art is the desire it creates in other artists to steal from it. Just think of all the uncountable references to Shakespeare that show up in film and literature. By way of example, a rap album came out a while back called Black Materia, where the artist Mega Ran retold the story of one of his favorite video games, Final Fantasy VII. But it wasn't just a straight retelling. He reappropriated the story to tackle themes of environmentalism, immigration, and economic crisis in our own time. Now, I'm not a rap connoisseur, and I don't know if Black Materia will be anthologized in music history textbooks years down the line, but video games are inspiring artists and musicians around the world.
Video games can never be art.
In the end, I think there are 3 problems with Roger Ebert's assertion. Using the label games for both Pong and a narrative-heavy experience like Final Fantasy does a disservice to both. Second, never is a very, very long time. And last, the idea of art is totally subjective. Back to Will Strong.
And I think that's really the problem with his argument in general, is that art is an arbitrary word. It doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. I had this really terrible class one semester where we were supposed to be learning how to draw, and the professor kept asking us, what is art? And man, after 3 classes of that, I almost dropped the class, but I had to take it because it was required. Because it was just, it was pointless. Everyone had a different idea, and he just wanted to get us all arguing. And I thought, what's the point of this? I like what I like, and I'm going to do that.
Here's what I really think. Most video games are just that. Games. A form of recreation rather than art that should be enjoyed with moderation. But perhaps there are some games that have become art for some people. Mostly, though, I think the discussion about whether video games can ever be art is more important and interesting than deciding one way or the other.